In the town of Whistler's Hollow, the rain was more than a mere weather phenomenon. It whispered secrets, carried the echoes of the past, and sometimes it brought things back from beyond the veil. Locals would often say that if you listened to the rain long enough, you could hear the voices of those who had left this world behind. Sarah Miles, a freelance writer with a penchant for the supernatural, found herself drawn to Whistler's Hollow not by chance, but by fate. She arrived on a stormy evening, her arrival heralded by a cacophony of thunder and the rhythmic tapping of rain against her car window, a soundtrack that seemed almost otherworldly in its intensity. Her destination was the old Finchley estate, a mansion that had stood empty for decades, its history marred by tragedy and unexplained disappearances. Sarah had come to research the estate for her next book, intrigued by tales of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena that seemed to surge with the autumn rains. As Sarah approached the grand, dilapidated entrance of the mansion, the wind picked up, sending a chill through her bones. She pushed the heavy oak door open, its creak echoing through the vast, shadowy halls of the mansion. Inside, the air was musty, filled with the scent of decay and abandonment. She set up her equipment in the main parlor, a room still adorned with the faded opulence of a bygone era. As she unpacked her voice recorder and camera, the rain intensified, pounding against the windows like an insistent visitor. Sarah began her investigation, speaking aloud to any spirits that might be present. "My name is Sarah Miles. I mean you no harm. I'm just here to learn your story. Is anyone here with me?" The only answer was the whisper of the rain and the occasional thunderclap, a natural orchestral accompaniment to her solitary vigil. But as the night deepened, Sarah felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The temperature in the room dropped, and her breath became visible in the cold air. Deciding to explore further, Sarah ventured into the heart of the mansion, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. As she walked down the long, narrow corridor leading to the library, she heard what sounded like footsteps following her, the soft sound of shoes on the wooden floorboards. Pausing, she turned quickly, her light piercing the darkness behind her. Nothing. The corridor was empty. Swallowing her rising fear, she continued to the library, the feeling of being followed persisting with every step. Inside the library, Sarah felt a sudden, oppressive silence descend upon her. The rain seemed muffled here, as if she had stepped into another world entirely. She scanned the room with her flashlight, the beam illuminating rows of ancient books and the large portrait of a stern-looking man hung above the fireplace. She wondered if this was Mr. Finchley, the original owner, whose mysterious disappearance had never been solved. As she approached the portrait, the air around her grew colder, and the faint smell of tobacco filled the room. It was said that Mr. Finchley had been an avid smoker, his pipe always in hand. Sarah's heart raced as she felt an unseen presence close by, watching her every move. Suddenly, the lights flickered on and off, and the room was plunged into darkness. Sarah's flashlight flickered out, leaving her in complete blackness. A low, menacing laugh echoed through the room, sending shivers down her spine. "Who's there?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling. The laugh came again, closer this time, as if right beside her ear. "You shouldn't have come here," a voice whispered, so close she could almost feel the breath on her neck. Panicked, Sarah stumbled back, her foot catching on a rug. She fell to the ground, her camera flying out of her hand. Scrambling to her feet, she groped in the dark for her flashlight, her fingers finally closing around it. Clicking it on, she shone the light around the room frantically. There, in the corner, stood a figure, shrouded in darkness. The figure stepped into the light, revealing itself to be a woman, dressed in a flowing gown, her eyes hollow, her skin pale as death. "You need to leave," the woman said, her voice a hollow echo of despair. "Leave now, before it's too late." Sarah, too frightened to speak, nodded quickly, backing away towards the door. As she turned to leave, the woman's voice stopped her. "He's still here," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. "He's never left." With those chilling words ringing in her ears, Sarah fled the library, her heart pounding. She didn't stop running until she was back in the safety of her car, the rain pounding furiously against the windshield as if trying to breach the fragile barrier between her and the night's terror. Gasping for breath, she started the car and sped away from the Finchley estate, the ominous silhouette of the mansion receding into the stormy backdrop. As Sarah drove, the eerie warning of the ghostly woman echoed in her mind, "He's still here," a phrase that chilled her to the core. Glancing in the rearview mirror compulsively, half expecting to see a figure in the back seat, Sarah's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The rain blurred the road ahead, each drop distorting and twisting the path in a ghostly dance. When she finally reached the safety of her small rented room in the town's inn, Sarah's nerves were frayed, her mind reeling from the encounter. Unable to sleep, she sat at the window, watching the relentless downpour and listening to the whispers of the rain, whispers that now seemed menacing, filled with hidden threats. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the skies remained a grim overcast, mirroring Sarah's tumultuous thoughts. Determined to understand the mystery of the Finchley estate and heed the spectral warning, Sarah decided to visit the local historical society. There, she hoped to find records or documents that might shed light on the history of the estate and its enigmatic owner. At the Historical Society, Sarah met Mr. Elwood, the elderly librarian, whose knowledge of local law was as extensive as the archives he tended. "Finchley, you say?" Yes, a tragic tale that won. The man was obsessed with the occult, they say," Mr. Elwood recounted, pushing up his glasses as he pulled out an old, dust-covered ledger from a high shelf. "Obsessed in what way?" Sarah asked, her interest piqued. "He believed he could summon and control spirits from beyond. It was all hokum and witchcraft, but according to these accounts, he held seances in his home, trying to breach the veil between worlds," Mr. Elwood explained, flipping through the ledger to a yellowed page marked with a newspaper clipping. "Did he succeed?" Sarah leaned in, her eyes scanning the faded print. "That depends on who you ask. Some say he vanished into thin air, a victim of his own hubris. Others believe he unleashed something he couldn't control." Mr. Elwood sighed, closing the ledger with a thud. Whichever the case, his spirit, or at least the consequences of his actions, still seemed to linger at that estate. Fueled by this new information, Sarah felt a renewed determination to uncover the truth. She thanked Mr. Elwood and left the Historical Society with a photocopy of the old newspaper articles. As she walked back to her car, the air felt charged, the weight of an impending storm hanging heavy despite the clear skies. That night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The sensation was so pervasive that she found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, expecting to see a face at the window or a figure in the shadows. Her mind raced with the possibilities of what Mr. Finchley might have unleashed, and what might still be lurking within the walls of his abandoned estate. Determined to find answers, Sarah decided to return to the Finchley mansion. She equipped herself with more sophisticated recording equipment, hoping to capture evidence of the paranormal activities she'd encountered. As she approached the mansion for the second time, the sky unexpectedly turned, a sudden storm brewing, dark clouds rolling in like an ominous warning. The wind howled as Sarah set up her equipment in the main parlor, the same room where she had first felt the ghostly presence. She began her vigil, speaking into the void, asking questions, urging Mr. Finchling or any other entity to communicate. Hours passed with minor disturbances, a cold draft here, a faint whisper there, until, just as Sarah was about to pack up, a violent gust of wind burst through the room, extinguishing her candles and plunging her into darkness. In the pitch black, Sarah heard the distinct sound of footsteps approaching. She turned on her flashlight just in time to see the curtains billow as if someone had rushed past the windows. A shadow darted across the room, too quick to be natural. Heart racing, Sarah followed the movement with her light, catching glimpses of a form that seemed both there and not, a flickering presence that defied natural explanation. The air grew colder, a frost that bit into her skin, and the whispers grew louder, converging into a voice that was unmistakably Mr. Finchley's, distorted by time and torment. "You cannot comprehend what you have set into motion," the voice boomed, surrounding her, the sound bouncing off the walls. Frightened yet captivated, Sarah recorded everything, her camera capturing the flitting shadows and her audio equipment picking up every nuance of the disembodied voice. The temperature dropped further, her breath visible in the air, and with a deafening crash, the window shutters slammed shut, plunging the room into eerie silence punctuated only by the patter of rain against the house. "Mr. Finchley, what did you unleash?" Sarah dared to ask into the darkness, her voice trembling with fear and cold. The response was immediate and terrifying. The whole house seemed to groan under the weight of a terrible, unseen force. A low, growling sound filled the air, not from one direction, but emanating from the walls themselves, as if the house was alive with anger or agony. "You cannot bind what you do not understand," the voice roared back, now seeming to come from directly behind her. Sarah spun around, flashlight sweeping across the room, revealing nothing but the furniture and the stacks of old, mouldy books. But then, the shadows in the corner of the room began to move, coalescing into a darker, denser form. It was as though the darkness itself was alive, pulsing with a sinister life force. Frozen in place, Sarah watched as the shadow began to take a more defined shape. It was tall and imposing, with elongated limbs that twisted in unnatural ways. The air around it seemed to warp and shimmer, as if it was radiating a powerful energy. With a sudden surge of terror-fueled adrenaline, Sarah began to retreat slowly, not taking her eyes off the shadowy figure. She continued to ask questions, hoping her voice recorder was capturing everything. "What are you? What do you want?" The figure lurched forward, a quick, jerky movement that was unnervingly silent. "Freedom," it hissed, the voice a sibilant echo that chilled Sarah to the bone. As the figure advanced, Sarah's back hit the cold, hard surface of the door. Realizing she was trapped, she fumbled behind her for the doorknob, her hands shaking violently. Just as she managed to turn the knob and spill out into the hallway, the figure reached for her, its touch a mere whisper against her back but icy cold, sending a spike of sheer panic through her spine. Sarah ran down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the empty mansion as the storm outside seemed to crescendo in intensity, reflecting the chaos inside. She darted into the library, slamming the door behind her and barricading it with a heavy bookcase. Panting and disoriented, she scanned the room for another exit. Remembering a small, concealed service door she'd noticed earlier, she hurried toward it, her hands trembling as she pulled it open and slipped through, finding herself in a narrow, dark passage that smelled of damp and decay. Behind her, the sounds of the entity slamming against the library door grew louder, the whole room seeming to shake with its fury. Sarah stumbled through the dark passage, her flashlight beam dancing wildly as she tried to keep her footing. The passage led her to the basement of the mansion, a vast, shadow-filled space cluttered with old furniture and statues covered in dusty tarps. The air was colder here, the atmosphere heavy with a foreboding that made her skin crawl. She realized that this part of the house was much older, perhaps even the foundation of the original building, where Finchley might have conducted his darkest experiments. As she moved through the basement, the feeling of being watched returned, more intense than ever. The rain could still be heard, now a muffled drumming above, each drop a reminder of the night's unreality. Suddenly, a soft, mournful wail echoed through the basement, stopping Sarah in her tracks. The sound was otherworldly, filled with sorrow and longing. It seemed to come from a dark corner of the room, where a top covered what looked like a large mirror. Drawn almost against her will, Sarah approached the mirror and pulled the top off. The glass was old and spotted, but in the dim light of her flashlight, she could see that it wasn't her own reflection staring back at her. Instead, the mirror seemed to be a window to another time and place, showing a stormy, twilight landscape that was both familiar and bizarrely alien. As Sarah watched, captivated, the figure from the shadows appeared in the mirror, its form clearer now, its eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence. "Help me," it whispered, its voice echoing from the mirror, as if crossing immense distances. The plea was unexpected, its tone so genuine that Sarah felt a surge of conflicted emotions, fear, pity, and an overwhelming sense of urgency. What could she do for this being, trapped as it seemed between worlds? "I don't know how to help you," Sarah admitted, her voice a shaky whisper. "Find the book," the figure in the mirror responded, its voice growing fainter, as if receding. "Break the cycle." As the image in the mirror began to blur, Sarah's heart raced. "What book?" "Where?" she called out, but the figure was fading, the strange landscape dissolving into a mist that slowly filled the glass, obscuring everything until the mirror showed only her own reflection, pale and frightened. Left with more questions than answers, Sarah turned away from the mirror, her mind reeling with the implications of the figure's words. "Break the cycle," it had said. What cycle? And what book could possibly hold the key to ending this nightmare? Determined to find out, Sarah made her way back through the basement, her footsteps echoing ominously off the stone walls. She needed to explore the mansion further, to find any clue that could help her understand the mysteries binding the Finchley estate. As she ascended the creaking basement stairs, the house seemed unnaturally silent, as if holding its breath. Reaching the top, Sarah paused, listening. The storm had abated, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. She moved stealthily down the hallway, her flashlight sweeping over dust-covered portraits and moth-eaten drapes, every shadow making her heart jump. Her search led her to Finchley's study, a room she hadn't explored before. The door was slightly ajar, and as she pushed it open, a musty smell of old leather and good smoke wafted out. The room was a time capsule, untouched by the years of neglect that had claimed much of the rest of the house. Books lined the walls, their spines cracked and faded, while papers and strange artifacts cluttered the desk. Sarah's eyes were immediately drawn to a large, leather-bound book on the desk. Its cover was embossed with strange symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly in the beam of her flashlight. Heart pounding, she approached the desk and picked up the book. It felt unusually heavy in her hands, and an inexplicable chill ran down her spine as she opened it. The pages were filled with dense, cryptic writing and eerie, detailed illustrations that depicted various rituals and dark entities. As Sarah flipped through the pages, a loose sheet of paper fell out. She picked it up and saw that it was a letter written in a trembling hand. It was dated several years after Finchley's disappearance. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began, and she froze, her breath catching in her throat. It was addressed to her, but how could that be? As she read on, the letter revealed that it was from her great-grandmother, a woman she had never known had any connection to Finchley or this cursed place. The letter spoke of a pact made by Finchley to gain knowledge and power from beyond, a pact that had bound the estate, and all those connected to it, to a cycle of darkness and despair. Sarah's great-grandmother had tried to end this cycle but had only managed to delay the inevitable. She had written this letter hoping that one day, someone would come who could finish what she had started. "You are the key, Sarah," the letter concluded. "You must find the way to break the cycle completely. Trust in your strength and do not falter." Shaking, Sarah placed the letter down. The room seemed to close in around her, the shadows deepening. She knew what she had to do now. She had to continue her great-grandmother's work, to find a way to use the knowledge in Finchley's book to end the cycle once and for all. But as she stood there, determined and afraid, the house began to groan ominously. A cold wind swept through the study, extinguishing her flashlight and plunging her into darkness. She heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, echoing through the halls of the mansion. Sarah's heart raced as she realized she was not alone. Whatever she had awakened with her presence and her probing into the past was coming for her. She needed to prepare, to find the strength to confront whatever horrors lay ahead. As the footsteps grew louder, Sarah steeled herself, clutching the ancient book to her chest. "I'm ready," she whispered into the darkness, her voice a mix of defiance and fear. Outside, the rain began to fall again, a soft whispering against the windows, as if the night itself was speaking to her, warning her, urging her on. The tale of the Finchley estate was far from over, and Sarah was now a part of its dark and twisted history. The darkness enveloped Sarah completely, making the room feel infinitely more vast and foreboding. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the sound almost deafening in the quiet of the study. With trembling hands, she attempted to relight her flashlight, the small flicks of the ignition casting eerie sparks into the surrounding gloom. Finally, the light flickered on, cutting through the darkness with a weak, trembling beam. As the footsteps drew nearer, Sarah quickly scanned the room for a place to hide. She noticed a large, ornate rug in the center of the room seemed slightly askew. Pushing it aside, she discovered a trapdoor. With no time to hesitate, she opened it and descended into the dark space below just as the study door creaked open ominously. The space beneath the floor was cramped and filled with the musty scent of old earth and mold. Sarah pulled the trapdoor shut silently, her breath catching in her throat as she heard the heavy steps now moving around the room above her. She pressed her ear against the wood, listening as the steps paused, then continued, slowly and methodically searching. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly as she waited in the dark, clutching the leather-bound book to her chest. The footsteps stopped, and a deep, guttural voice filled the room above. "I know you are here, Sarah," it boomed, a voice not human, filled with a malice that chilled her to the bone. "You cannot hide from your destiny." Despite the terror that gripped her, Sarah felt a surge of defiance. She remembered her great-grandmother's words in the letter, urging her to trust in her strength. She was not just a passive participant in this story, she was its resolution. She carefully opened the book, her flashlight beam illuminating the pages filled with ancient texts and symbols. She began to read softly, her voice steady despite the fear. Above her, the entity roared in frustration, the sound shaking the very foundation of the house. "You dare defy me," it thundered. But Sarah continued, her voice growing louder and more confident with each word. As she chanted the incantations written in the book, a warm light began to emanate from the pages, casting a protective glow around her. The ground trembled, and the air filled with a sound like rushing wind. The darkness beneath the trapdoor seemed to pulsate with a life of its own, recoiling from the light of the book. Then, with a final, powerful declaration, Sarah completed the chant. A brilliant light exploded around her, piercing upward through the trapdoor and into the room above. There was a scream of rage and pain from the entity, a sound that echoed through the halls and vibrated in Sarah's bones. Silence fell suddenly, the only sound the gentle patter of rain on the house. Sarah pushed open the trapdoor and climbed out into the study. The room was empty, the malevolent presence gone, dissolved by the power of the ancient rituals. Exhausted but elated, she sank to the floor, the book still clutched tightly in her hands. As dawn broke, light streamed through the windows, casting serene patterns on the floor. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the clearing skies. The storm had passed, and with it, the dark legacy of the Finchley estate. She knew her journey wasn't over. The book held many more secrets, and she felt a deep responsibility to protect and study it. But for now, Whistler's Hollow was safe, its spectral tormentor vanquished by the courage of one woman determined to confront her fears and change her fate. Sarah packed away her equipment and left the mansion, the door closing with a gentle click behind her. As she walked away, the sun rose higher, casting warm light on her path. Whistler's Hollow would sleep peacefully now, the shadows of the past held at bay by the knowledge and bravery of its unlikely guardian. And though the night's horrors were over, they would linger in her mind, a reminder of the night she faced the darkness and prevailed. Sarah Miles had changed the narrative of her own story, from victim to victor, from haunted to healer. The Finchley estate loomed large in the rearview mirror as she drove away, but it no longer seemed threatening. It was just another chapter in her book, a story of triumph over the shadows, written not with ink, but with courage and light. As Sarah's car rolled down the winding path away from the Finchley estate, the first golden rays of the morning sun pierced through the trees, casting long shadows across the road. She felt a profound sense of relief mixed with a lingering unease. The book lay on the passenger seat, its cover catching the light, the symbols on its surface gleaming faintly as if still alive with the residual magic of the night's events. The town of Whistler's Hollow soon came into view, its quaint cottages and small shops barked in the warm morning light, a stark contrast to the darkness of the estate she had left behind. Sarah knew she could not just return to her old life, not after what she had experienced. The mysteries she had uncovered were too deep, the dangers too real to ignore. Stopping at the local cafe, a favorite spot she had frequented during her stay, Sarah took a moment to reflect. She sipped her coffee, looking out at the peaceful town square, the normalcy of the scene belying the supernatural tumult she had just survived. She realized that her life was irrevocably changed. There was no going back, only forward, into a world that was now infinitely larger and more mysterious than she had ever imagined. With a resolved sigh, she opened her laptop and began to write, not just to record what had occurred, but to make sense of it all. Her words flowed easily, a torrent of thoughts and revelations that filled the pages. She wrote of the entity, of the ritual, of her great-grandmother's secret legacy, and of the book, a tome of ancient knowledge that was now her responsibility to safeguard. As she wrote, Sarah felt a strange comfort in the act of storytelling, as if each word she penned not only told her tale but also fortified her soul against the darkness she had fought. She realized that this was her calling, not just to seek out the shadows but to challenge them, to use her knowledge and her newfound abilities to protect others from the unseen dangers lurking in forgotten places. The cafe began to fill with the morning rush. The normalcy of the scene is stark contrast to the night's eerie silence and terror. Sarah looked around, her eyes meeting those of the townspeople, innocent to the true nature of the world just beyond their sight. She felt a protective affection for them, for this town, and she knew she had found her purpose. Finishing her writing for the morning, Sarah packed up her things, the book carefully wrapped and placed in her bag. She paid for her coffee and stepped out into the sunlight, feeling its warmth on her face, a soothing balm after the chill of the ghostly encounters. As she walked back to her car, Sarah felt the weight of the book against her side, a constant reminder of her duties and of the ongoing battle between light and darkness. She knew she would need to study the book, to learn its secrets and prepare for whatever might come next. But she was ready, fortified by her experiences and driven by a newfound resolve. Driving out of Whistler's Hollow, Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror, the town fading into the distance. She felt a twinge of sadness at leaving but knew she would return. For now, the road ahead called to her, filled with mysteries to solve and darkness to light. The rain began to fall again, a gentle reminder of that fateful night, but now it sounded different to her, not menacing, but cleansing. With the road stretching out before her and the rain softly drumming on the roof of the car, Sarah felt a deep, unshakable peace. She had faced her fears, had looked into the abyss, and had emerged stronger. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready for the rain, for the shadows, for the whispers on the wind. The journey was just beginning, and Sarah Miles was no longer just a writer of stories. She was a keeper of secrets, a warrior in the age-old battle against the darkness, and she would not back down.